When ancient laws crumble, the massive Xanthari space station hung like a crystalline jewel against the star-speckled void, its translucent walls pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the viewing portal, watching as ships from across the galaxy converged on this neutral meeting point orbiting Kepler Prime. Each vessel told a story of its species: the sleek, organic curves of Xanthari bioships, the geometric perfection of Kythera craft, the chaotic but functional designs of Nexari vessels, and towering above them all, the brutal angular forms of the Vorthak war fleet. Sarah adjusted her diplomatic sash, the simple blue fabric marking her as Earth's cultural attaché. At 34, she was young for such a position, but her background in psychology and conflict resolution had earned her this assignment. The irony wasn't lost on her that humanity, barely 2 centuries into galactic politics, was being called upon to witness the potential collapse of a peace that had lasted 10 millennia. The station's central chamber was a marvel of Xanthari biotechnology. Living walls shaped themselves into amphitheater seating, while the ceiling displayed a real-time view of the surrounding space. Representatives from 5 major galactic powers sat in carefully arranged sections, each group maintaining the precise distances required by ancient protocol. Sarah noticed the tension immediately, the way the Xanthari's natural luminescence flickered with anxiety, how the Kythera's normally perfect posture showed signs of strain, and the aggressive positioning of the Vorthak delegation. High Curator Zephyrs of the Xanthari Coalition called the assembly to order, their musical voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic design. We gather under the light of ancient law, bound by the covenant of 5 suns that has preserved peace for 10,000 cycles. Yet today, that covenant faces its gravest challenge. From the Vorthak section, War Prime Fracken rose with deliberate slowness. The massive beings stood nearly 3 meters tall, their exoskeleton gleaming like polished obsidian. When they spoke, their voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The covenant of 5 suns was forged in a different age, between equals. The galaxy has evolved. The Galactic Empire no longer recognizes the authority of outdated treaties. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The Nexari representative, Engineer Prime Quillix, leaped to their feet, their insectoid features clicking rapidly in agitation. This is madness. Without the covenant, what prevents total war? Your empire's strength comes from the stability our peace provides. Thracken's laugh was like grinding metal. Our strength comes from our strength alone. The weak have hidden behind ancient words for too long. The Vorthak Empire formally withdraws from all restrictions placed upon us by the covenant. We will expand as we see fit, trade as we choose, and defend our interests without consulting inferior species. The chamber erupted. Xanthari began shifting colors rapidly, their emotional state visible in swirling patterns across their skin. The Kythera delegation conferred in their precise, mathematical language, while the smaller Nexari group buzzed frantically among themselves. Sarah watched it all, her mind racing through the implications. Curator Zephyrs managed to restore order, but their luminescence had dimmed noticeably. War Prime Fracken, surely you understand the consequences of this action. Without the Covenant's protection, the smaller species will learn to adapt or perish. Fracken cut them off. This is the natural order. The Vorthak have grown beyond the need for such artificial constraints. Sarah stood slowly, drawing attention to the human section, a delegation of precisely 1. May I speak? Several representatives looked surprised. Humans were observers in this ancient conflict, their species too new to have been part of the original covenant. But Curator Zephyrs nodded respectfully. The floor recognizes Dr. Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation. Sarah stepped forward, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. I've been listening to this debate, and I noticed something interesting. Everyone's talking about the covenant as if it's either completely valid or completely worthless. But what if that's not the real question? Fracken's attention fixed on her like a predator sizing up prey. Explain yourself, human. The covenant worked for 10,000 years, because it served everyone's interests. If it's not working now, maybe the problem isn't the treaty itself, but the fact that the galaxy has changed. Instead of throwing away 10 millennia of peace, why not evolve the agreement? Engineer Prime Quillix chittered excitedly. The human speaks wisdom. Adaptation rather than destruction. But Thraken's expression darkened. You presume much for a species that has existed in our galaxy for mere moments. What could humans possibly offer that we haven't considered? Sarah met the War Prime's gaze steadily. A fresh perspective. You see, we've had to learn something that older species might take for granted. How to survive when everyone else is stronger, older, and more established than you are. The chamber fell silent. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. On Earth, we have a saying. When you can't win the game, change the rules. The Vorthak are right that they've outgrown the old covenant. But that doesn't mean abandoning cooperation entirely. It means creating something new that works for everyone. Curator Zephy's pulsed with cautious interest. What kind of solution do you envision, Dr. Chen? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the gamble that could either save the galaxy or make humanity very powerful enemies. What if instead of one rigid treaty, we created a dynamic system? A framework that could adapt to changing circumstances, with built-in mechanisms for growth and evolution. The Kythera representative, Logic Primevax, spoke for the first time, their mechanical voice precise and calculating. Impossible. Legal frameworks require absolute parameters. Variables introduce chaos. Do they? Sarah challenged. Or do they introduce flexibility? The strongest materials aren't the hardest. They're the ones that can bend without breaking. War Prime Thraken leaned forward, suddenly interested despite himself. You speak in riddles, human. What concrete proposal do you offer? Sarah smiled. I propose we test it. Give me 48 hours to demonstrate how human diplomatic methods could resolve a real crisis. If I succeed, you agree to consider a new framework. If I fail, humanity withdraws from galactic politics for a century. The audacity of the proposal stunned the chamber into silence. A species barely established in galactic affairs was offering to stake their entire political future on solving a problem that had stumped civilizations for millennia. Thraken's laugh echoed through the chamber. You would risk your species standing on such hubris. I would risk it on human ingenuity. Sarah replied calmly. But the question is, are you confident enough in the superiority of traditional methods to accept the challenge? The War Prime's eyes glittered with dangerous amusement. Very well, Dr. Chen. You have 48 hours. But you must resolve a crisis of our choosing, using only your human methods, with all delegations present as witnesses. Curator Zephy's pulsed with concern. War Prime, surely this is too hasty. The challenge is accepted, Thraken declared. Tomorrow, we will present Dr. Chen with a crisis that has defied solution for 3 centuries. When she fails, as she must, the Vorthak Empire will proceed with our plans, and humanity will learn its place in the order of things. As the delegations began to disperse, Sarah remained standing in the center of the chamber, the weight of her decision settling upon her shoulders. She had just committed not only her own career, but her entire species' political future to an untested theory. Around her, the living walls of the Zenthari station pulsed with nervous energy, as if the structure itself could sense the precarious moment in galactic history. Engineer Prime Quillix approached her, clicking softly in what Sarah had learned was a necessary expression of concern. Dr. Chen, you have shown great courage, but also great risk. The Vorthak do not make idle challenges. Whatever crisis they present will be designed to be unsolvable. Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to prove that it was never really impossible in the first place. As the chamber emptied, Sarah stood alone beneath the starfield ceiling, watching the Vorthak fleet maintain its aggressive formation around the station. Tomorrow would determine whether humanity's approach to conflict resolution could truly offer something new to the galaxy, or whether their brief moment on the galactic stage would end in spectacular failure. As the chamber emptied, Sarah stood alone beneath the starfield ceiling, watching the Vorthak fleet maintain its aggressive formation around the station. Tomorrow would determine whether humanity's approach to conflict resolution could truly offer something new to the galaxy, or whether their brief moment on the galactic stage would end in spectacular failure. The next morning brought with it a sense of anticipation that seemed to electrify the very air of the station. Sarah had spent the night reviewing every piece of galactic history she could access, but she knew that preparation could only take her so far. Whatever the Vorthak presented would require real-time adaptation and creative thinking. The chamber had reconfigured itself overnight, the living walls forming a more intimate circular arrangement. All 5 delegations were present, with additional observers from minor species throughout the galaxy. Word of the challenge had spread quickly, and Sarah realized that far more than humanity's reputation was at stake. This moment could reshape galactic politics entirely. War Prime Thrackan stood at the center of the circle, a holographic display materializing before him. Dr. Chen, behold the Kepler paradox, a crisis that has consumed diplomatic resources for 300 years without resolution. The display showed a detailed map of the Kepler system, with multiple colored zones indicating territorial claims. Sarah studied it carefully, noting the complex overlapping boundaries and resource disputes. 3 centuries ago, Thrackan continued, the discovery of rare quantum crystals in the Kepler asteroid belt created competing claims from 4 species. Each has legitimate historical, legal, and economic arguments. Traditional arbitration has failed repeatedly because any solution that benefits one group necessarily harms another. The system remains in deadlock, with resources unused and tensions perpetually high. Sarah examined the data flowing across the display: mining rights, historical claims, economic projections, legal precedents. It was indeed a perfect example of a zero-sum conflict, where traditional negotiation had reached an impasse. "And my constraints?" she asked. "You may speak only with the representatives present. No outside resources, no additional time for research. You have until tomorrow's dawn to present a solution that all parties can accept." Sarah nodded slowly, then did something that surprised everyone. She smiled. "Before I begin, may I ask each delegation a question?" Curator Zephys pulsed with curiosity. "Proceed." Sarah turned to each group in turn. "What would success look like for your people? Not what you're demanding, but what would actually make your species thrive?" The question caught them off guard. Instead of focusing on the specific territorial claims, Sarah was asking about underlying needs and motivations. One by one, the representatives began to speak, not about legal precedents or historical rights, but about their people's dreams and fears. The Zentheri spoke of their need for stable energy sources to power their living cities. The Kithera required rare materials for their technological advancement. The Nexeri needed economic opportunities for their rapidly growing population. The 4th claimant, the Hellion Collective, sought to preserve sacred sites within the asteroid field. As Sarah listened, she began to see patterns that the formal negotiations had missed. The real needs weren't mutually exclusive. They were complementary. But centuries of adversarial negotiation had locked everyone into zero-sum thinking. "What if," Sarah said slowly, "we stopped thinking about who owns what and started thinking about who needs what?" And with that question, everything began to change. Part 2. What others call impossible. The chamber fell silent as Sarah's question hung in the air. War Prime Thrackan's expression shifted from amused condescension to genuine interest, while the other delegates exchanged uncertain glances. After 3 centuries of deadlock, the human diplomat was suggesting they had been asking the wrong questions entirely. Sarah moved to the center of the holographic display, gesturing to the complex web of territorial claims. "Look at this map. Every line represents a boundary, a division, a limit. But what if instead of seeing barriers, we saw connections?" She touched the display controls, and the territorial boundaries faded, replaced by flowing lines that connected different regions based on resource types and needs. The Zenthari need quantum energy for their biocities, but they need it consistently, not in massive quantities. The Kythera require rare metals for their technological matrices, but they need variety, not volume. The Nexari want economic opportunities. They're the galaxy's best logistics coordinators. And the Hylians need their sacred sites protected. But those sites are scattered throughout the field, not concentrated in one area. Engineer Prime Quillix clicked rapidly, their compound eyes focusing intently on the new display. You suggest cooperation rather than competition. I suggest efficiency, Sarah replied. What if instead of fighting over who owns which asteroid, we created a system where everyone gets what they actually need? Logic Prime Vax of the Kythera processed this with mechanical precision. Impossible. Resource allocation requires ownership parameters. Without clear boundaries, chaos results. Sarah nodded respectfully. That's true in a static system. But what if we created a dynamic one? What if ownership rotated based on actual usage and need? The concept was so radical that it took several minutes for the translator systems to find equivalent concepts in each species' language. War Prime Fraken's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity for the first time. Explain this dynamic system. Sarah began manipulating the holographic display, showing new patterns of organization. The Kepler asteroid belt becomes a shared resource managed by all 4 species, but not owned by any one group. Instead of permanent territories, we create functional zones that adapt to real-time needs. She highlighted different sections of the asteroid field. Zone 1 contains high-energy quantum crystals that the Zenthari need. But they only need to harvest these during their city's growth cycles, about 4 months every standard year. The rest of the time, the Kythera could extract the rare metals they need from the same asteroids. Curator Zephy's pulsed with sudden understanding. The resources are complementary, not competitive. Exactly, Sarah continued. Zone 2 has medium-grade materials perfect for Nexari processing operations. They could coordinate logistics for everyone else while building their own economic base. And Zone 3, she highlighted several scattered asteroids. These contain the Hylian sacred sites. They remain permanently protected, but the spaces between them could be utilized by others, with Hylian oversight to ensure respect for their religious requirements. The Hylian representative, Keeperthis, spoke for the first time, their crystalline voice ringing with cautious hope. You would protect our sacred spaces while allowing economic activity around them. I would make protecting your sacred spaces part of the economic activity, Sarah replied. The Nexari get paid to coordinate logistics that respect Hylian religious requirements. The Zenthari and Kythera get access to resources they need without interfering with sacred sites. Everyone has a stake in making the system work. War Prime Thraken studied the display intently. This requires unprecedented cooperation. What prevents one species from simply taking more than their share? Sarah smiled. The same thing that prevents it in any successful system: mutual benefit and mutual dependence. If the Zenthari tried to monopolize resources, they'd lose access to Nexari logistics and Kythera technology. If the Kythera tried to hoard materials, they'd lose the energy sources the Zenthari provide. Everyone succeeds together or fails together. Engineer Prime Quillix buzzed with excitement. A symbiotic system rather than a competitive one. But the complexity of coordination is exactly what the Nexari excel at, Sarah finished, and the Kythera could design the technological frameworks to manage it efficiently. The Zenthari could grow specialized biocomputers to handle the organic aspects of scheduling and adaptation. Every species contributes their greatest strengths. Logic Prime Vax processed this for several moments. The mathematical elegance is unexpected, but implementation would require trust levels unprecedented in galactic history, which is why we start small, Sarah said. A pilot program, 1 asteroid, shared between 2 species for 6 months. Prove the concept works on a small scale before expanding it. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates conferred rapidly with their respective groups. Sarah watched the energy in the room shift from skepticism to genuine engagement. For the first time in 3 centuries, the representatives weren't arguing about who deserved what. They were collaborating on how to make something new actually work. War Prime Thraken raised a massive hand, calling for silence. Dr. Chen, your proposal is intriguing, but it assumes that cooperation will emerge naturally from mutual benefit. What happens when conflicts arise? The same thing that happens in any healthy relationship, Sarah replied. You work through them together. But more importantly, you design the system to prevent most conflicts from occurring in the first place. She modified the display again, showing communication networks and decision-making protocols. Regular conferences where all parties discuss needs and adjustments. Transparent resource tracking so everyone knows exactly what's being extracted and used. Rotation schedules that ensure fair access over time. And most importantly, a dispute resolution process that focuses on finding solutions rather than assigning blame. Keeper Thys stepped forward, their crystalline form refracting the display's light into rainbow patterns. You speak of changing not just how we share resources, but how we relate to each other entirely. Yes, Sarah said simply, because that's what humans learned when we first encountered other species. We were weak, new, and had nothing to offer except our willingness to find new ways of doing things. We couldn't compete with your ancient wisdom or advanced technology, so we had to learn to cooperate. Curator Zephy's pulsed with understanding. This is why your species adapted so quickly to galactic civilization. You never tried to dominate. You tried to connect. And it worked, Sarah continued. Not because we're superior, but because we were desperate enough to try something different. Sometimes being the newcomer is an advantage. You're not invested in the old ways of thinking. War Prime Thraken was silent for a long moment, his massive form motionless as he processed the implications. Finally, he spoke. You have presented not just a solution to the Kepler paradox, but a challenge to the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic politics. I've presented an option, Sarah corrected gently. The choice of whether to try it belongs to all of you. The voting process took 3 hours. Each delegation conferred internally, then with allied species, then returned to debate specific implementation details. Sarah watched the careful dance of galactic politics, noting how centuries of established procedures both constrained and enabled the discussion. Finally, Curator Zephy's called for the formal vote. All those in favor of implementing Dr. Chen's pilot program for the Kepler system. One by one, the representatives cast their votes. The Nexari voted yes immediately, excited by the economic opportunities. The Hylians followed, swayed by the promise of protected sacred sites. The Zenthari pulsed their agreement after extended internal debate. All eyes turned to the Kythera delegation. Logic Prime Vax processed for nearly a full minute before speaking. The mathematical probability of success is acceptable. The Kythera convergence votes yes. That left only the Vorthak. War Prime Thraken stood slowly, his presence dominating the chamber. The Vorthak Empire acknowledges that Dr. Chen has successfully demonstrated an alternative approach to the Kepler paradox. However, Sarah felt her heart sink. She had come so close. However, Thraken continued, we vote yes. Not because we believe this cooperation will be easy, but because we believe it will be stronger than the old ways of division. The chamber erupted in celebration. Representatives from species that had been enemies for centuries were suddenly discussing cooperation protocols and resource-sharing agreements. Sarah found herself surrounded by beings expressing gratitude in dozens of different ways. Zenthari color patterns of joy, Nexari clicking songs, Kythera mathematical harmonies. But it was War Prime Thraken's approach that surprised her most. The massive Vorthak leader extended a clawed hand in the human gesture of greeting. Dr. Chen, your species has taught us something valuable today. Perhaps there is wisdom in being willing to question what has always been. As the celebrations continued around them, Sarah shook the War Prime's hand, feeling the careful control in his grip. What happens now? Now, Thraken replied, we discover whether cooperation is indeed stronger than conquest. But I suspect that humanity's influence on galactic politics has only just begun. Looking around the chamber at the unprecedented cooperation taking place, Sarah realized that they had accomplished something far greater than solving the Kepler paradox. They had demonstrated that 10,000 years of established tradition could change in a single moment, if enough people were willing to believe that something better was possible. The age of rigid territorial boundaries and zero-sum competition was ending. The age of dynamic cooperation and mutual benefit was about to begin. And at the center of it all was a species that had learned to survive by making friends instead of enemies, connections instead of conquests. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not through strength or ancient wisdom, but through the simple revolutionary idea that everyone could win if they were willing to work together. And sometimes, Sarah realized, that's the most powerful force in the universe.